The first time I did it, it was pure panic. A reflex. She'd just walked in with a real estate agent's business card, all smiles, talking about market value and downsizing. The words hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just a house. It was the last place I'd heard your mother laugh. The kitchen where she'd dance while making pancakes. Every floorboard held a memory she'd left behind. So when my daughter said, "Dad, we need to talk about listing it," my chest just seized. Not a real seizure, but I clutched at it, gasped for air, and slumped into my armchair. The color drained from her face. "Dad! Oh my God, Dad!" The business card fluttered to the floor, forgotten. In that moment of her sheer terror, I saw my opening, a terrible, desperate opening. The ambulance came, the EMTs checked me over. At the hospital, they ran tests. "Stress," the doctor finally said, giving my daughter a stern look. "He's been through a lot. You need to avoid topics that upset him." She was so apologetic, so careful for weeks after, and I felt a horrible mix of guilt and victory. I'd bought more time, so it became my play, my sick, secret defense. I got good at it. I'd see that certain, determined look in her eye, the one that meant she was gearing up for the talk, and I'd start prepping. A little extra salt on my dinner to bump the blood pressure reading. I'd practice the gasp in the mirror, not too dramatic, just ragged and weak. The key was the clutch. Right hand over the heart, left hand gripping the chair arm, knuckles white. I timed it for maximum effect, usually right as she said the word sell. The performance was flawless. Each episode sent her into a spiral of worry and postponed the conversation for another month. I was fighting for my home with the only weapon I had left, her love for me. But let me ask you, have you ever done something so desperate to hold on to a memory? Tell me in the comments. And subscribe, because this story is about to take a dark turn I never saw coming. The first time I did it, it was pure, unplanned instinct. She'd just sat me down at the kitchen table, the one her mother had picked out, and said, "Dad, we need to talk about the market." And before she could even get to the word equity, a pressure built in my chest, a real panicked tightness. So I leaned into it. I clutched my shirt, let my eyes go wide, and made a sound like a tire going flat. "My medicine," I gasped. The performance was born in that moment of sheer terror. The fear wasn't of a heart attack, it was of losing the last place that still smelled like her. After that, it became a grim routine, a rehearsed piece of theater I perfected. I learned the exact cadence of her voice when she was shifting from small talk to the conversation. I'd see the set of her jaw, the way her fingers would tap the tabletop. My cue. I'd start with a subtle wince, a hand drifting to my sternum, then the sharp intake of breath. The paling of my face was easy. I'd just think about walking through the empty, echoing halls after she left. The guilt was a living thing, chewing me up from the inside every time I saw the genuine fear flash in her eyes. She'd rush for my pills, her hands trembling, all thoughts of realtors and staging forgotten. In that suspended silence, as she waited for me to recover, the house felt safe again. For a little while. But the lies, they build their own kind of prison. I started to dread her visits, not because of the sale talk, but because of the act I had to put on. I was mourning the honest relationship we'd lost, all while pretending to have chest pains. The weight of it was heavier than any grief. I was stealing her peace of mind to protect my own ghosts. And sitting here now, in the quiet of this living room, I have to ask myself, what's the real heart attack waiting to happen? Is it the one I'm faking, or the slow, quiet death of my daughter's trust? Let me know what you think I should do next down in the comments. And if you've ever held on to something too tight, hit subscribe. This story is just getting started. The first time it happened, it was pure instinct. She'd just finished telling me about the fantastic offer from some developer. Her eyes lit up with dollar signs, not memories. My chest felt tight for real, so I leaned into it. I gasped, clutched at my shirt, let my eyes go wide with a panic that wasn't entirely fake. "My pills." "In the kitchen," I wheezed. The color drained from her face. The conversation about selling my home, the home I built with her mother, stopped dead. After that, it became a strategy, a desperate man's playbook. I studied the symptoms online: shortness of breath, pain radiating down the arm, cold sweat. I'd wait for her to bring up downsizing or equity, and then I'd launch into my performance, a masterpiece of paternal guilt. I'd slump in my worn leather chair, the one her mother picked out, and I'd watch her ambition turn to fear. She'd rush to get me water, call off the realtor waiting in her car, her voice shaky. In that moment, she wasn't a stranger trying to auction off my past. She was my little girl again, scared of losing me. And for a little while, the house was safe. But you can't cry wolf forever, not even with a weak heart. The looks from her husband grew sharper, more suspicious. The episodes were always so convenient. I knew the clock was ticking. The walls of this house, every creak in the floorboards, every splash of paint we'd chosen together, felt like they were holding their breath, waiting for the final, real attack. The one where I couldn't get back up. Was I a coward? Maybe. But this wasn't just a house. It was the last living scrap of my old life, of our family. And I was fighting for it the only way I knew how. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see how this desperate stand ends, make sure you're subscribed. The first time I did it, it was pure instinct. My daughter Jessica had just finished telling me about this fantastic offer from a developer. She was using that voice, the one she reserves for explaining smartphones to the elderly. "Dad, it's just a house. Think of the money. Think of the freedom." And I felt this real, honest-to-God pain in my chest. Not from my heart, but from my soul. This wasn't just a house. It was the kitchen where I taught her to make pancakes, the living room floor where we built blanket forts during thunderstorms, the porch where her mother and I would drink iced tea and watch the sunset. So I clutched my chest. I let out this ragged gasp, saw the color drain from her face. The talk of selling stopped instantly, replaced by panic, by concern. In that moment, I wasn't a stubborn old man. I was her vulnerable father. And it worked. The subject was dropped for weeks, but you can't unring a bell. The idea was in her head now, this notion that my life would be better somewhere smaller, somewhere easier. So the conversations kept coming back, and my performance, it evolved. I became a method actor in my own tragedy. I'd time it perfectly. Right as she said the words market value or downsizing, I'd go still. My hand would flutter to my collar. I'd start breathing shallowly, staring past her like I was seeing something she couldn't. I studied the symptoms online. A little pain radiating down the left arm, a cold sweat on the brow. I never said the words heart attack. I just showed them, and every single time it derailed her. The realtor's brochures would be forgotten on the coffee table. Instead, she'd be fetching my pills, bringing me a glass of water, her voice soft with worry. I started to hate myself for it, lying to my only child, manipulating her love to protect a pile of bricks and memories. But the alternative, signing those papers, watching a stranger's bulldozer back into the maple tree I planted when she was born, that felt like a different, more permanent kind of death. I was trapped. Each fake episode bought me more time, but it also built a wall between us made of my own deceit. She started looking at me, not with frustration, but with a fragile, pitying fear. She thought she was watching me die by degrees. And in a way, she was. She just had the course all wrong. The guilt was a constant low hum in my ears, louder than my own heartbeat. But here's the terrible truth. It was easier to be a sick man than to be a heartbroken one. At least this way, the house and all of her mother that was still in it got to stay standing for one more day. What would you have done? Held your ground or played the only card you had left? Let me know in the comments. And if you're invested in this father's desperate lie, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is about to take a turn I never saw coming. The first time I did it, it was pure panic, an instinct. My daughter, Sarah, was sitting right there at the kitchen table, the one I'd built with my own hands, and she slid a glossy realtor's brochure across the worn oak. "Dad, just look at the numbers for this area. We're talking life-changing money." My chest actually did tighten, a real visceral ache, but instead of saying that, I went for the grand performance. A sharp gasp, my hand flying to my heart, a slow dramatic slide down in my chair, the look of sheer terror on her face. It was immediate. The brochure was forgotten. She was calling 911, her voice shaking. In the ambulance, with the oxygen mask on my face, I felt a wave of guilt so thick I could taste it, but it was overpowered by a deeper, more primal relief. The house was safe, for now. I got a stern talking to from the ER doc about stress. Sarah was a nervous wreck, promising not to bring it up again. I thought that was it, one and done. But 3 months later, over Sunday dinner, her husband Mark, the one who always talks about asset portfolios, cleared his throat. So about the market trends in the neighborhood. And there it was again, that cold dread. This time my performance was smoother, more practiced, a pained wince, a struggle for breath. I didn't even have to say a word. Sarah shot Mark a death glare and was by my side in an instant. "Not now, Mark. Can't you see he's overwhelmed?" The conversation died, replaced by concerned whispers and a tray of untouched pie. That's when I realized I'd stumbled onto a perfect, terrible solution. It became my secret weapon. Any mention of equity, downsizing, or staging, and I'd launch into my routine. A clutch of the chest, a glassy stare into the middle distance. I had it down to an art. I'd even done my research. Just enough medical jargon to sound convincing, but not so much as to raise suspicion. I was no longer just a stubborn old man clinging to his home. I was a fragile patient, a cardiac risk. They tiptoed around me. The house, with its creaky floors and the ghost of my wife's perfume in the hallway, was my sanctuary. And I was its guardian, performing this desperate, pathetic play to keep the world from changing. But let me ask you something. Have you ever had to pretend to be broken just to keep the one thing that's still whole? Tell me in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe, because this act couldn't last forever. And what happened next? Well, that's where the real story begins. The first time I did it, it was pure instinct. My daughter, Chloe, had just sat me down with that look, the one that meant a serious, adult conversation was about to happen. She started with the market, how hot it was, how the equity in this old place could set her up for life. I felt a genuine sharp pang in my chest, but it wasn't my heart, it was panic. So I clutched my shirt, let my eyes go wide, and made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a groan. The performance was born in that second. The fear in her eyes was immediate, real. She dropped the spreadsheet, fumbled for her phone. Dad, talk to me." I waved her off, breathing heavily, insisting it was just indigestion, just stress. The house sale wasn't mentioned again for a month. I realized I'd stumbled onto the only language she still understood. She talked numbers, ROI, staging. I spoke in medical emergencies. It became my secret defense. Every time she'd pivot a conversation toward downsizing or practical next steps, I'd launch into my routine. A hand on the chest, a sudden pallor, a slow slide down in my favorite armchair. I got good at it. I studied the symptoms online, the radiating pain, the cold sweat. I'd even keep a nitroglycerin pill bottle filled with mints in my pocket for effect. The guilt would eat at her, and she'd back off, fussing over me, making tea, her plans temporarily shelved. But the cost was higher than I'd ever imagined. I saw the constant worry in her eyes now, a permanent shadow. She hired a part-time nurse to check in, which felt like surveillance. My friends started treating me with kid gloves, speaking slowly. I was building a prison of my own making, painting myself as a frail, dying man, just to hold on to these walls and these memories. The house was full of my wife's laughter, our life. But it was becoming a museum I was chained inside. And the worst part, I started to wonder if one of these times the panic might be real, that the fear of losing it all might actually stop my heart for good. So, what's the line between a clever trick and a self-destructive lie? Have you ever pretended to be something you're not, just to keep the peace? Let me know in the comments. And if you want to see how this fragile house of cards finally comes crashing down, make sure you're subscribed. The first time I did it, it was pure panic, an instinct. My daughter Sarah was sitting right there in my late wife's favorite armchair, the one she'd reupholstered herself, and she started in with that calm, rehearsed tone. "Dad, we need to talk about the market. This house is too much for you." I felt the walls close in, the memories in every floorboard, every smudge on the doorframe where we marked the kids' heights. They were about to be boxed up and sold to some stranger. Before I even knew what I was doing, my hand flew to my chest. I gasped, a ragged, wet sound I didn't know I could make. I saw real fear in her eyes, not concern about square footage, but primal daughterly terror. And it worked. The conversation stopped dead. The EMTs came, all fuss and flashing lights, and at the hospital they found nothing. "A severe anxiety episode," the doctor said. "You need to avoid stress." Sarah looked so guilty, so relieved, and I felt a terrible, shameful power. I discovered a weapon, so it became my routine, my secret script. Any mention of downsizing, equity, or senior living community, and my performance began. A slight wince, a slowing of my step. If she pressed, I'd escalate. Shortness of breath, a sheen of sweat on my brow, perfected by simply thinking of losing the home we'd built. I became an actor in my own life, and the living room was my stage. I'd clutch the mantelpiece where our wedding photo sat, my knuckles white, and watch the color drain from her face. She'd drop the subject every single time, rushing to get me water, her voice soft with apology. I told myself it wasn't a lie, not really. The pain was real. The impending loss was a heart attack, just one of the soul. I was buying time, I reasoned, time to make her see, to make her remember. But the cost was a quiet poison. I saw the way she started tiptoeing around me, treating me like a fragile museum piece instead of her father. Our conversations became landmines she was afraid to trigger. She stopped talking about the future altogether, and we were left with only the safest, smallest talk. The very thing I was fighting for, our connection, this home full of our shared life, was becoming a sterile, silent monument. I was preserving the house, but I was erasing the daughter inside it, and the weight of that deceit, that manipulation, sat heavier on my chest than any fake cardiac event ever could. I was building a wall between us, one dramatic gasp at a time. What would you have done? Could you have just let it all go? Let me know in the comments, and if you want to hear how this painful charade finally shattered, make sure you're subscribed. The truth always finds a way to the surface. The first time I did it, it was pure instinct. She'd just sat me down at the kitchen table, the one her mother picked out, and started with that calm, rehearsed tone. "Dad, we need to talk about the market. This house is too much for you." I felt a real panic, a genuine tightness in my chest, so I leaned into it. I clutched my shirt, let my eyes go wide, and made a sound like I was trying to suck air through a straw. The performance was so convincing, she dropped the whole subject and called 911. The paramedics were not amused when my vitals came back perfectly normal, but the look of sheer terror on my daughter's face. That bought me 6 months of peace. It became my secret weapon. A well-timed gasp, a hand over the heart, a slow slide down in my recliner whenever the words equity, downsizing, or assisted living entered the conversation. I'd see her gearing up for the talk, and I'd go into my routine. I became an artist of the faux cardiac event. I studied the subtle differences between indigestion and impending doom. I'd recover with a weak smile, whispering, "Just one of my spells, honey. The doctor says stress is a trigger." And the house, my sanctuary filled with 50 years of memories of her mother's laughter in the hallway, remained untouched, unsold. But the guilt was a quiet, constant tenant. I'd see the worry lines deepen around her eyes, the way she'd tiptoe around certain subjects. I was weaponizing her love for me, and I knew it. I was trading on the memory of the heart attack that actually did take her mother. It was a low, dirty trick, and some nights, staring at the ceiling, I hated myself for it. But then I'd walk into the living room at dawn, see the sun hit the mantelpiece just so, and I'd think, this is worth the lie. This silence is worth the sin. Until the day the performance wasn't a performance. We were arguing, really arguing about a realtor's flyer she'd left on the counter. The pressure built behind my eyes, a real iron band clamped around my ribs, and the world tunneled into a grey, roaring point. This wasn't a clutch and a gasp. This was the floor rushing up to meet me. The last thing I saw before the darkness wasn't the familiar ceiling rose, but my daughter's face, etched not with fear this time, but with a devastating, exhausted resignation, as if she was thinking, not this again. And in that split second, I realized the ultimate cost of my charade. I had cried wolf so many times that when the real wolf was at the door, no one would believe it, not even my own little girl. The first time I did it, it was pure instinct. My daughter, Sarah, had just finished her spiel about maximizing my equity and downsizing to a senior community, and a cold panic, sharper than any chest pain, seized me. This wasn't just the house. It was the kitchen where I taught her to make pancakes, the living room floor where we built blanket forts, the backyard oak with the swing I hung with my own 2 hands. Every nail, every memory was mine. So when she said the words listing price, my hand flew to my chest. I let out a gasp, a real one born of genuine terror, and slumped back in my armchair. The performance poured out of me, the shallow breathing, the pained wince. I saw her marketing consultant coolness shatter into raw, daughterly fear. "Dad? Dad? Oh my God, are you okay?" The house sale was forgotten. She was fetching water, calling 911 until I weakly waved her off, whispering, Just need a minute. It's passing." The guilt was a bitter pill, but it was worth it. The conversation stopped. The house was safe. It became my secret weapon. A well-timed clutch of the chest, a strategic shortness of breath whenever the words open house or staging left her lips. I got good at it. I'd study the subtle signs, the way she'd straighten her posture before launching into her realtor's pitch. That was my cue. I'd start with a distant look, a slow, troubled exhale. By the time she got to comparable properties, I'd be pale and perspiring, my fingers fumbling for the imaginary nitroglycerin pills I didn't have. The script was always the same. Her panic, my feeble recovery, and a solemn, doctor-ordered ban on stressful topics. I bought myself weeks of peace each time, but the cost was a quiet, creeping loneliness. My defense mechanism was pushing her away. Our calls became brief check-ins on my health, not the long chats we used to have. Her visits felt tense, like she was walking on eggshells, terrified of triggering another episode. I was preserving the house, but I could feel the warmth inside it slowly draining away, replaced by the sterile silence of my own deception. I was the ghost in my own home, haunting it to keep it, and in doing so, haunting the one person I loved most. The walls held our memories, but they were also becoming the walls of my own making. I had to wonder, what was I really trying to save, and what was I losing in the process? Let me know in the comments if you think this charade could ever be worth it, and hit subscribe, because this story is about to take a turn I never saw coming. Look, I'm not proud of it, but the first time she brought it up, the words just fell out of her mouth like they were nothing. Dad, we should really think about selling this place. And my body reacted before my brain could. A sharp gasp, my hand flying to my chest, a slow, dramatic slide down the kitchen counter. The performance was pure, panicked instinct. And it worked. The conversation stopped dead. Her concern was immediate, real. She rushed over, her plans about downsizing and equity completely forgotten. In that moment, I learned a terrible, powerful truth. My love for this house was a weakness she could exploit, but her love for me was a weakness I could weaponize. So, it became my secret defense, a rehearsed routine. The slight paling of the face I'd practice in the bathroom mirror, the specific shallow wheeze. I'd time it perfectly, right as she'd get to the part about realtors or staging. Clutch, gasp, stall. It was a morbid dance. She'd drop the spreadsheets, fetch my completely unnecessary pills and a glass of water, and the subject would be tabled for another few weeks. Each time a quiet shame would curl in my gut, but it was drowned out by a louder, more primal victory. I was protecting my ground. Every beam in this house held a memory of her mother. The scuff on the floorboard from her first bike, the pencil marks on the door frame charting her growth. To sell it wasn't just a financial transaction, it was a betrayal of our entire history. But the guilt was a silent tenant moving into the spare room of my conscience. I'd watch her after an episode, her face etched with a worry that was aging her. She'd speak softer, move more carefully around me. She started buying me heart-healthy groceries I didn't want and suggesting ridiculously gentle walks. I was her fragile old man, and I had built that cage for myself. The lie was becoming a prison. I was so busy guarding the past, I was poisoning my present with her. And the worst part? I started to wonder if she knew. If that flicker in her eyes after the third or fourth attack wasn't just concern, but a dawning, horrible suspicion. The house was still standing, but the trust between us, that foundation was beginning to crack. The first time I did it, it was pure instinct. My daughter Sarah had just sat me down with that look in her eye, the one that said she was about to deliver bad news she'd convinced herself was good for me. She started talking about market value and downsizing, and how a nice modern condo would be so much easier. I felt a real panic, a genuine squeeze in my chest. So I clutched at my shirt, gasped for air, and let my eyes go wide. The effect was immediate. All the talk of square footage and open floor plans vanished, replaced by pure, unadulterated concern. She called 911, held my hand, and for the first time in months, she wasn't my financial advisor. She was my little girl again. In the ambulance, with a siren wailing, I felt a pang of guilt. But it was drowned out by a deeper, more stubborn truth. This house was my last stand. Every crack in the plaster, every creaky floorboard was a memory of her mother. Letting go felt like a second, final burial, so it became my strategy. A well-timed clutch of the chest, a strategic gasp. I got good at it. I'd see her pull out the real estate brochures, and I'd start massaging my left arm, subtly at first. The conversation would always stop. The doctors could never find anything concretely wrong, just an elderly gentlemen with episodic anxiety. They'd suggest stress management. Sarah would look at me with such worry, and for a week or two the pressure to sell would lift. She'd bring over homemade soup instead of comparative market analyses. I was playing a dangerous, desperate game, trading on her love to buy myself more time within these walls. I knew it couldn't last forever. I was building a house of cards on a foundation of lies, and one day a single breath of truth would bring it all crashing down. But in that moment, with the scent of her mother's roses drifting through the window, it felt worth the risk. What would you have done to hold on to your last piece of the past? Let me know in the comments.